Today's video will try to cover all the important parts of Chaucerian age, which is named after Geoffrey Chaucer. So let's simplify this age. Welcome to the age of Chaucer. In this period, French lost the official prestige and English became the language of the commoners and courts or parliament as well. So, English started colonizing people like the Anglo-Saxons. It was around 1362 that the English language replaced Latin and French. Black Death was a devastating outbreak of the plague. The plague attacked both the rich and the poor people. So Black Death was spread by rats and fleas in the year 1348 and it carried off nearly half of the population of England. So now we can easily assume the impact of Black Death. The positive things were such as unexpected legacies from the dead relatives. The plague led to a labor shortage because of the death of innumerable laborers. The Statute of Laborers, which was established in 1351, tried to control the wages according to their own norms. Historians have referred to the lengthy conflict that took place between the rulers of France and England from 1337 to 1453 as the Hundred Years' War. A number of disagreements, including one over the rightful heir to the French throne, led to the start of the conflict. By agreeing to a 7-year truce, Edward IV and Louis XI agreed to resolve future disputes through diplomacy rather than force of armies. So the war can officially come to an end with this truce. There was never a peace pact signed after the 100 Years' War. The reason behind peasants' revolt was a series of poll taxes in 1377, 1379 and 1380. The uprisings broke in many places in East Anglia, Kent and the home countries. 1381 was the year when the rebels were led by Wat Tyler, the famous rebellion. They killed the Archbishop of Canterbury and burned the palace of John of Gaunt. So both the peasants and the townsmen took part, and there were some friars and priests who supported the rising also. On June 13, 1381, Wat Tyler led the rebels through the gate over which Chaucer lived. This uprising, interestingly, was condemned by all the medieval chronicles, and John Gower of this medieval age also portrayed the peasants as beasts in his Vox Clamantis. The peasants of 1381 were not alone in attacking the church. Wycliffe promoted the Protestant thought as well. He believed that each and every person, irrespective of their gender or class, can read the Bible. So this is the slogan: all the goods of God should be common. Wycliffe decided to bring out the first complete English translation of the Bible in 1380. He wanted to give people access to Bible without the church's traditional commentary. And that time Bible was in Latin, which few could understand. And who were the Lollards? The Lollards were the followers of Wycliffe. The church in England owned vast lands and wealth. They could punish laymen for moral crimes like adultery and for failure to pay the taxes. During that time, people were expected to pay 1/10 of their income. People paid for priests to ensure an early release of the soul from the purgatory into heaven. You know what? The ultimate purpose of study at the university was to become trained in theology, the study of God. There were many complaints and satires attacking the wealth of monasteries, the greed and the corruption of the church. In the Chaucerian age, we used to see four important writers: Langland, Gower, Mandeville, Chaucer. Langland voices the social problems and attacks the corruption of church directly. He was famous for the text The Vision of Piers Plowman, which was composed around 1362. This text describes major historical events such as Black Death, Peasants' Revolution, 100 Years' War, and so on. It mentions the seven deadly sins also. This poem for the first time refers to the Robin Hood tales. Another text, that is Richard the Redless, we are not sure about the genuine authorship of this text. It is a protest against Richard II though. Interestingly, Langland was banished after 1399. Gower was a scholar criticizing the vigorous life and its consequences. Chaucer dedicated his Troilus and Cressida. Remember that Chaucer dedicated his Troilus and Cressida to Gower, and he mentions Gower as moral Gower. So Gower has three phases of his literary career: French, Latin, English. Speculum Meditantis belongs to the French phase. It is a long sermon in verse on the immortality of age. Vox Clementis belongs to the Latin phase. It talks about Wat Tyler's rebellion of 1381, that means the Peasants' Revolution. Then Confessio Amantis and In Praise of Peace belong to the English phase. Confessio Amantis, or the Lover's Confessions, talks about the confession of Amans to Genius, who was the priest of Venus. It is a poem of 33,000 octosyllabic lines. Gower wrote this poem since Richard II wanted someone to write in English. This poem contains 8 books, among which 7 books are on the 7 deadly sins and 1 book is on morals. Mandeville was a traveler who romanticized the outer world. His text, Voyage and Travel of Sir John Mandeville, was written in Midland dialect. The legendary hero King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table became the subject of a wide range of romances by the late Middle Ages. The Arthurian legends were first presented in writing in this particular book, that is Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, which was published in 1485. Yes, I understand that one slide is not enough for Geoffrey Chaucer. If you need, I will definitely upload a separate video on his works in detail, because Chaucer needs a special attention, we know that. Chaucer's literary career is divided into 3 parts: French, Italian, and English. French, that means the first phase of his 30 years was dedicated to the French literary models. There are few texts which belong to French period, that is Roman of the Rose, which is the translation of French Roman de la Rose, then ABC, a poem, then Book of the Duchess, then Complaint to Piet, then the Italian phase. In this second period of 15 years, Chaucer seems to be more stronger than the French period. And in this phase, he was vehemently influenced by Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio. Troilus and Cressida, which was inspired by Boccaccio's Il Filostrato, House of Fame, Parliament of Fowls, belong to this phase. Then the last phase, that is the English, which is the third of 15 years of his life, is the time of his ultimate development. Legend of Good Women and the Canterbury Tales belong to this phase. Now you can just take the screenshot of this slide, which is on English Chaucerians. Chaucerians, that means who were the followers of Geoffrey Chaucer. from the perspective of the theme or the style. So we just have to remember the works of these writers. Thomas Occleve wrote a letter to Cupid, the regiment of princes. Compton Rickett says, quote, "There is no duller dog in literature than Occleve," unquote. So we have to remember what Rickett said about Thomas Occleve, because UGC Nator said love to ask this kind of questions. That means who says this on or to whom. Then John Lydgate. John Lydgate wrote London Lack Penny, Troy Book, The Story of Thebes, The Fall of Princess, The Temple of Glass. Stephen Hawes wrote Example of Virtue, Part-Time of Pleasure. Alexander Barclay, who was the first one to write eclogues, he wrote Ship of Fools. John Skilton, who was the first poet laureate, he wrote Book of Phyllis Sparrow, Book of Colin Clout, and Magnificence. So we have to remember that who for the first time wrote eclogues, who was the first poet laureate, and we will just remember the works of these writers, and they are the English followers of Chaucer. The last slide is on Scottish Chaucerians. King James wrote King's Square, Robert Henryson wrote Moral Fablies, Robin and Malrine, The Testament of Cresside. William Dunbar is very important, who wrote The Thistle and the Rose, The Golden Targe, Dance of the Seven Deadly Sins, Two Married Women and the Widow, Lament for the Makers. And in this text, Dunbar mentioned Chaucer, Gower and Henryson. Remember this. Then Gavin Douglas, who wrote Palace of Honor, inspired by Chaucer's House of Fame, and he translates Virgil's Aeneid, which Ezra Pound praises once. So these are the information which we need to remember. Then John Barber, who wrote The Bruce, and for the first time in this text we can see the celebration of Scottish nationalism. Okay, that's it for today. I hope my efforts will definitely help you. Thank you so much for listening.